today's video, we're going to be painting up a rust monster from the Dungeons & Dragons WizKids range. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to start off with our rust monster here, and we're actually going to use some Citadel contrast paints. And we're going to start off with gore-grunta fur for our rust monster. We're going to be using it for the base color of our rust monster here, pretty much our main priority color. And then the good thing about the WizKids models is that they're already primed up, so you can just place the gore-grunta fur we've got on here just straight on top with the contrast paints, since they require primer a light primer to be down to really get off that effective technique that they have with the contrast paints. So we're just using it to do the upper part of the shell here, and I'm also going to be doing it across the whole length of the tail, and I'm also going to be using the contrast paint as well to be painting up the legs. So just making sure we get a pretty good coat here. And as well as with this, because I'm still new to using contrast paints, I found out that if you keep applying layers of contrast paint over one another, it actually gets darker. So that's an interesting thing to note with contrast paint. So if you want a bit darker than this, you may want to wait for it to just dry a little bit, come over with another lot, and it'll start darkening down. So once all our contrast paint is all nice and dry, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come in with a fur brown. I'm going to be using the fur brown as a dry brush here. So got a little dry brush, place a bunch of your paint onto a paper towel, and then you want to pull off as much of that as you can, so you're just left with just a little bit of the paint on there. And then just pretty reasonably aggressively I'm going here, is just going over the tops of the model, trying to catch all the raised edges with our fur brown to really lighten up those high points on the miniature. And then once we're done with that first layer, I'm actually going to come in with a monster brown now, and we're going to be doing the exact same thing that we did with our leather brown that we just did before. And I'm just going over again, which is just another lighter color, and just dry brushing it on the exact same way over the exact same areas as well. I just want a bit of variation on our rust monster's outer shell here. So just going over it, and the reason why I'm going over it now, of course, is because we want to come in with the detail a little bit later on, because we're going to start getting into the finer detailed parts of the rust monster. So I want to get all this dry brushing done so it doesn't paint over the areas we want for detail later on. Okay, so now we have all that dry brushing done. What we're going to do now is we're going to come in with dark stone, and I'm going to be using the dark stone to be painting the underbelly of our rust monster here. I'm also going to be using it to paint the face, pretty much all the exposed areas of our rust monster, so mainly concentrating towards our face of our rust monster, like you can see here, just giving it a nice coat, and the underbelly. And I also want the dark tone to go underneath there. It's going to be really hard to get in there, so if you need to, just grab a smaller brush and just really take your time trying to get all that underbelly as much as you can. And I also want to make sure I go all up along the underside of the tail as well. Now I'm doing this pretty much for variation here, separating out rather than just making it a full-on brown monster. You may want to substitute this out for maybe either a yellow or a bright orange, but I'm keeping it reasonably dark. I'm trying to go for a more natural sort of bug/animal look here with the rust monster. Okay, so once that step's all done and dry, we're going to come in now with uniform grey, and we're going to be using the uniform grey to just paint up the base of our rust monster that he's standing on here. So I want to get this on here before we start getting into some of these other fine details and covering up some of this mess that we have all over here. So just giving it a nice good coat with our uniform grey, which is going to also sort of stand out a lot on our very brown and sort of, those darker colours on the model by giving it this light coloured base, and it's also going to look sort of like a cave floor as well. And then once we have all that done, we're going to come in now with a vampire red. And I'm going to be using the vampire red to be painting up the sort of, I guess, feelers on our rust monster here. So I'm coming in and just getting on the side of my brush here, just really sort of carefully and delicately trying to go in there rather than going for big brush strokes along the side. I want to try and keep this as easy as possible. So you can see there that I went across with the along the side like that, and you can see it sort of really clumps up with this on here. So you've got to really come in like this and try and avoid getting in between all that detail, because going over just like this, it sort of clumps all up at the top and stuff like that. So to avoid that, you just want to come in and just dab it along the sides here, just trying to get it as nice and neat and get it all into those really like fine crevices and stuff that it has in here. And then of course also don't forget to do the edge of our tail here, and I'm also going to be doing the little ones just underneath there as well. And don't forget to do the underside of the rust monster's tail as well. Okay, so once all our red is dry, we're going to come in now with a khaki from Vallejo, and we're going to be using the khaki to be painting up all the little toes on our rust monster here, just the little claws. And I'm also going to be using it to on a very fine tip brush, so I can try and avoid painting over everything that we've already painted over, just trying to keep it as neat as possible. I'm also going to be painting up just the little mandibles on our rust monster as well, to separate them out so you can really see them there. Now remember too, because this is all fine detail work, if you do happen to spill it on it anywhere, you can just as easily wait for it to dry and then come back with the other colored paint to touch it up. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to come in with some demonic yellow now, and we're going to be using this demonic yellow to be painting up the eyes of our rust monster. So I'm just grabbing a really fine tip brush here, or if you need another brush, just get a super fine tip on it, placing just a little dab of paint just on the very tip of it, and I'm just placing a dot of paint on each eye. It actually has a recess in the miniature to for the eyes, so I'm really just trying to fill that in. And then if you do mess it up, don't be afraid to just let it dry, paint back over it, and then just try again. I know it can be quite a tricky thing to do, but while doing this, you get quite a bit of practice and just trying to get that aim right. And if you need to, just use a smaller brush. Then once we have our eyes painted up and dried up, what we're going to do now is we're going to come in with some agrax earthshade, and I'm going to be placing agrax earthshade over the entirety of our miniature here. Now, one thing I've learnt with this is because I haven't used a wash really too much over a contrast paint before, is that applying the wash over this really does darken it down quite a lot as well. A lot more than I was expecting here on this miniature. So if you want to leave this step out and you want sort of a lighter rust monster, because sort of placing this agrax earthshade on here is going to dull down a lot of that sort of orangey color we have from that gore-grunta fur. So if you want more of that orange look, you might want to skip this step with the wash. But if you want more of a brown, dirty sort of rust monster who's been in the muck, this agrax earthshade will be good for that sort of dark muted look. And then once all that's dry, what we're going to do now is going to come in with nuln oil, and we're going to be using the nuln oil to actually place a wash on the base of our miniature. So where we placed our uniform grey, we're going to be coming in now with our nuln oil, and we're doing this to separate out the difference from the agrax earthshade to the nuln oil. So it's just going to separate the two colours from the base rather than having all merged in, so it sort of pops out against the base. Okay, so once all that's all dried up, we're going to come in now with pure red, and we're going to be using pure red to be painting up the very tips of our feelers on our rust monster here. And this pure red's going to really stick out against the vampire red that we have on here, which is a very dark red, and of course we went over it with our wash, so it's really darkened it down again. So coming in with this pure red, it's going to be super bright on here. It may not look as bright on camera as it does in person, It's actually a very bright difference in the model, and I think that's really good for a rust monster, since the rust monster of course has the effect of rusting weapons and armor when they touch it. So having this really bright color to stand out, I think is just a really good idea to get across that it's sort of nearly otherworldly, or even just like bugs in general. Some of them have really elaborate and bright colored feelers. So just coming in here with the pure red and doing that is going to add a cool bit of detail to the miniature, as well as adding just some brighter color there to sort of pop out against all that brown and muted color that we've already put on the miniature. Okay, so now what we're going to be doing is we're going to come in now with ash grey, and what we're going to be doing with the ash grey is we're just going to be dry brushing it onto the bottom of our base to really pick out all those raised areas of detail on the miniature's base. Since he's sort of in like a cave environment, we want to bring out all that little bumpy texture that it has on there, which it does have quite a lot of sort of a cobblestone-y type floor. So we want to pick out all that detail with the dry brushing here. So just being careful to avoid all the areas we've already painted up before. And with that, we have completed painting our Rust Monster miniature from the Dungeons & Dragons WizKids range. And you can see it wasn't a hard miniature to paint up, especially since we had some of the Citadel contrast paints, so I'm actually enjoying using them. It can take a lot of steps out of painting a miniature, especially if you want to speed paint it here, like pretty much like how we've done it. It didn't take us very long to paint this up. And then of course we just added in some little highlights, like giving our pure red to the feelers to really make them pop out as much as we could, and adding in those really piercing yellow eyes. Just some things there to make it stand out while it's on the table. But with that, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it's been helpful for you if you want to paint up your own rust monster or anything like that. And if you enjoyed this video and this tutorial, and if it's helped you out at all, please consider subscribing to the channel and watching some of my other videos. But with that, I think that's where we're going to end the video today, and I hope to see you in the next one.